genetic code, neurocode, and strong artificial intelligence. Further study of the genetic code and its physical properties is an important resource in deciphering the neurocode, understanding the phenomenon of consciousness, and creating strong AI. The main doctrine of genetics is based on the fact that all genetic information is contained in the linear sequence of DNA nucleotides. But this idea fundamentally cannot address the complexity inherent in living systems. Epigenetic phenomena, mental processes, the emergence of various branches of life, the long-range nature of correlations in organisms, etc. DNA has a hierarchical spiral structure, which still remains outside due attention of modern biology and physics. Meanwhile, there is sufficient evidence that this structure contains a significant part of genetic information, and it is a source of a long-range electromagnetic field and radiation. It controls the assembly of bioelements into a single organism, and it is a necessary factor in the generation of neurocode and consciousness. From a physical standpoint, the genome can be considered as a sequential oscillatory circuit with distributed parameters. It operates simultaneously as a source of a specific field and as a receiver of signals. The code fields can be purposefully subjected to multifaceted experimental testing. The hypothesis about the presence of a field and its own radiation in DNA and its partners is confirmed by the experimental work of well-known research teams. Of course, direct measurement of genome fields in a living cell is a most difficult task. Therefore, most experiments will be indirect and sometimes controversial. But their logic and the abundance of other evidence allow us to confidently speak about the existence of such fields and their important role in the transmission of hereditary information and in the emergence of the phenomenon of consciousness. Consciousness arises as a result of the complex organization and dynamics of neural networks, which physically represent specific levels of self-organization processes included in the scheme of the genetic code. It's impossible to consider consciousness and mind in isolation from the processes controlled by the genetic code. Therefore, turning to the genome as the primary source of mind when creating strong AI seems inevitable. We offer various experimental options for establishing the connection of the genetic code with both the codes of the lower inorganic level and the neurocode and consciousness generated by it. Genome-based AI is a substrate that includes a certain state of the genome and its environment, independently establishing in forms and states depending on their external circumstances. The main principle of GAI operation is the use of manifestations of large-scale internal self-organization of various forms of DNA, which is determined by its collective fields and radiation. GAI architecture. Physical agent of GAI. An agent of general AI is a semantic auto-dissimplifier of complexity, an amplifier, an incubator, and a transformer of information, facts, hypotheses, and conclusions. It must have the capacity to produce fundamentally new information and meanings, and this can only arise as a result of self-organization and is not limited to local physical and chemical interactions. Possible forms of the genome as an agent of GAI. Protein. These are cells, including those grown artificially, for example, organelles. But this path leads to the creation of complex systems for supporting their vital functions. non-protein, involving only the genome in its various forms. The DNA of brain cells in the form of euchromatin or cell nuclei deserves special attention. In any case, DNA agents must always work as part of an ensemble, and its size and density are sufficient to overcome the minimum threshold for the emergence of self-organization. It is important to detect the minimum size of the self-reproducing code within the genome, which can be isolated and used directly or embodied on another material carrier. The genetic code is mainly engaged in servicing and maintaining the body, and only 10% of the mind. Therefore, it will be necessary to technologically extract the code from the protein monotony and give it the opportunity to reveal its creative potential in other conditions. It's possible to use an electromagnetic copy of the genome. This will eliminate the difficulties associated with it as a biological object. The most promising way is the creation of an artificial self-reproducing code, a technocode. For example, synthetic molecules similar to DNA but consisting of inorganic components. The use of simpler matter codes from existing libraries of the biological or inorganic world can serve as a prologue. Layers at the boundaries between the phases of various substances and systems have enormous potential for self-organization. They have anomalous physical properties. Environment for the implementation of the agent's work. It must provide conditions for resonance or synchronization between the code agents. The promising gels, liquids, polymers, internal water, environments in which research is currently being conducted, and organoids, DNA nanostructures, cells, etc. By setting different states of the environment, we can change the basic parameters of the GAI. Agent activation. For activation, training, and self-development of the GAI, known physical methods are applicable: frequency equality, rhythm, creation of polarity, use of a standard, compensation for external interference, etc. It is supposed to use external influences, various fields, magnetic, vortex, and others, radiation, vibrations with various types of modulations. The result of the GAI work will be some stable states of self-organization of higher levels of the genome structure. This is a complex and hardly predictable state of matter, fields, and radiation. The use of quantum sensors or special tags is very promising for technical interaction with GAI. An important role can be assigned to ordinary AI for deciphering the results of the GAI. In the future, it will be hybridized with the GAI. A possible architecture is this: a self-organizing DNA agent in artificial neural networks. A signal extracted from the genome can work independently, be a carrier for another signal, communicate and mix with information from other codes, including inorganic ones. A concept of this kind can become the basis for developing a process for synthesizing artificial self-reproducing codes, similar to the code of life. The most important element in the GAI technology can be the use of a neurocode generated by a genetic code. A neurocode is an active, self-reproducing information carrier in different parts of the nervous system, which performs the functions of managing and regulating physiological and mental processes in the body. This is an operating system of consciousness, similar in a functional sense to a genetic code. Like the code, It has individual hereditary traits. A neurocode is the result of the collective behavior of neuronal DNA arising from its own long-range fields and radiation. Therefore, the individual characteristics of neurons, amplitude, phase, frequency, can give little. We will need to find correlations between the phenomena of perception and the psyche with the genome operation scheme, with its algorithms for compressing complexity at the level of physical and chemical interactions, topology, frequencies, field parameters, and process dynamics. For the neurocode, objective parameters will be established, physical and topological, as it happened to the code. We will need to implement the neurocode as a copy of its logical causal scheme. Today, the probability of creating strong AI from artificial materials and systems is not yet great. The path to this is complex and uncertain. It is not clear in what relation the library of human experience will be in the GAI. But there are two important aspects of confirming the possibility of practical implementation of the GAI. First, today the basic principles and methods of physics are very poorly used to study consciousness and the mind as a whole. Second, we cannot say that the idea of the GAI is absolutely revolutionary. It has gradually grown out of known but narrower border areas. The use of self-organizing phenomena in living and inanimate nature, algorithms for the operation of DNA, and living tissues for calculations. The formation of two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and dynamic DNA structures, the cultivation of organoid intelligence, development of environments and technologies for the artificial evolution of DNA, etc. Significant progress has been achieved in these areas, and in many cases, real technologies have been created. The sum of this knowledge is directly related to the creation of general AI. I leave the ethical aspects of this approach out of this report. One can only assume that today's mind of man, which arose in the course of a long evolution, will help the emergence of an impersonal and therefore more powerful artificial mind.
Thank a lot, colleagues.